Hello, my name is Dr. Andy Hogg. I am the subject matter expert for special educational needs and disability at Shaping Lives. I am here today to start the first of our webinars that goes hand in hand with our new handbook called Building a Village to Raise a Child, Our Collective Responsibility to Every Learner. And that's going to be looking at how children develop as they grow and understanding the complex world of childhood development and recognizing that we shouldn't box all or group all children together and expect them all to develop at the same rate. We're going to look at how environmental and societal factors influence how children develop and hopefully give parents and educators, teachers, nursery staff a bit of an understanding about how that development takes place and what we should be looking for and how we can support learners who maybe have those additional needs as well, those children who maybe aren't following a typical developmental profile. So I'm going to start off by getting you to think about how childhood has changed. And I mean, if I think about my own childhood here, um, it was very, very different to kids today. I mean, my childhood typically was opening the door at 9:30 in the morning and I would be cycling up and down the road. I might be playing Kirby. I'd be throwing a ball over my head and trying to bounce it off the curb opposite. I might be playing manhunt around the village where I was, so I'd disappear all day, coming back only to be fed at lunchtime and tea time. There'd be football in the park. We'd be climbing trees. All that kind of stuff was quite typical of kids growing up in the 60s, 70s, 80s when I was growing up. And of course, that is very different to the way children grow up today. Because whether you're a parent or you are an educator, it won't really matter. As I say, that journey in childhood, that developmental process that happens will happen, but it's in a very different environment to what children experience today. So when we're looking at childhood development, we have to be very mindful of the prejudices, I suppose, that we bring from our own backgrounds, and bring that into the modern day context and understand how children are growing up and the challenges that they face daily in terms of environments and stuff. And this isn't really about arguing that my childhood experience was better than children today. That's not the case at all. What we're looking to do is acknowledge that things are different, and we're looking with perhaps a perspective of our own experience. And what we want to see is that the environment has radically changed and that children are growing up today in this digital stimulated environment. They're constantly exposed to technology that we didn't have. I mean, when I was growing up, the latest technology was a digital watch that maybe played, an alarm of the Yellow Rose of Texas or something like that. When the alarm went off, that was the height of technology back then. Maybe a calculator on your watch. Remember those? My goodness, a long, long time ago. But that was the height of technology. Atari was the first games console, came out when I was about 12 or 13. Again, these things, things have moved on drastically now. We now work in a world where VR and AI have taken over in the last couple of years as well. And that's what our children are growing up in. So we need to be very, very mindful of that. And also kind of recognize that there are additional pressures on children because of society now. Our government wants well-educated, literate beings. They always did, I guess. But we have a huge focus on schools, and the stress that's put onto schools is actually filtering down onto our children as well, because our expectations have been raised. And if you have a child who isn't meeting those developmental stages that we would expect, this is the milestones, and they are struggling at school, then suddenly, that stress is even more on that family and on that child as well. Um, so, we need to be very, very aware of society and the pressures that it puts on childhood too, and parents as well. There is a huge awareness of neurodiversity now that we didn't have in the past. Typically in the past, we labeled a lot of children or young people as naughty and we wrote them off at the age of 9, 10, 11 years old. It was awful what happened. And you'll recognize this from your own childhood. You'll look around your own communities and see people that you thought at school would never amount to something. And hopefully, it's the case where the people I was at school with, they've gone on to achieve great, great things. They really have. So yeah, don't wear that label forever. Buck the trend and challenge it as well. So yeah, we'd have a greater understanding of neurodiversity, but also mental health as well, and the impact of things like the pandemic, and some of the experiences that our children come to schools with, and how that impacts on their development and their learning as well. So for children who do have any special educational needs and disabilities, um, things like the changes in society have been really, really significant for them because we expect them to sit in a classroom and conform, and sit at a table for several hours a day, switch from one task to another quite quickly. And that's really challenging for children who do have SEND because these are children who would typically have coped really, really well in those flexible, movement-rich environments. But they will really, really struggle when they have prolonged sitting. And as I say, constant sensory processing, lights on, listening to noises and stuff like that. So they're not going to be able to focus. So if you have that, as I say, if your child has those needs or has those difficulties, then it's a really challenging environment that we're bringing them into. And sometimes we need to look at our curriculum. And this is where we have to go to our government and challenge them. And educationists have to do this because we have evidence of children in Scandinavia who typically don't sit in a classroom until they're 7 or 8 years old. And they have fantastic literacy. We're looking at Finland as the model of educational delivery in the world. For schools, they're supposedly the best. Their kids don't sit down in the classroom until they're 7 or 8 years old. Happens in Norway, Scandinavia, Sweden as well, Germany to some extent too. So yeah, we have to be very, very aware of what we're expecting our children to do and recognise that before we ask what's wrong with the child, what we should be saying is what's happening around this child. And that's where we're going to start this first chapter today. Let me just move the slide on again. So, I mean, our special educational needs and disability landscape today is one of great challenge. It really is great, great challenge. We have a huge demand for SEND services. The Department of Education white paper that came out in the last few weeks, Every Child Achieving and Thriving, recognises that there has been a systemic shift to meeting soaring demand for SEND support. 1 in 5 children in the UK has some form of special educational need or disability. That's huge. That comes from a number of things. We've got to remember that we have improved identification and diagnosis now. We understand things a lot better. And of course, we've got the internet, so parents are a lot more aware of difficulties. And sometimes that can be a problem as well because people are matching up their own perceptions of a diagnosis and diagnosing the child before they've actually got a medical diagnosis. But parents are a lot more aware of what their children perhaps should be able to do in terms of developmental milestones. We do have better professional understanding. So when I was at school, any difficulties you had were just dismissed. You were just a naughty child. That thankfully has changed. That we have better informed educators now at schools, SENCOs, TAs, and so on, who recognise that perhaps behaviour is a communication of a need. So no longer are they being, or should they be labelled as the naughty or challenging kids. As soon as we see behaviour, we say, okay, what do we need? What do we know about this child? What's causing that behaviour now? So we have better professional curiosity now, if you like. We also have increased survival of children who have complex needs as well. So previously, children who had complex medical needs or at birth maybe didn't survive very long. But of course, now medicine and care has got better. Those children are thriving. They are living much longer, and they have their right to a school place. And they come to schools and they enrich schools where they come to. Particularly if you're working in special education, you'll know this. So yeah. The other thing that we have to talk about then is the mental health of our young children. As I said, this is huge. As I say, we have 1 in 5 children also, not just with a special educational need, but experiencing a diagnosable mental health condition. And if you have a child who is on the CAMHS waiting list, CAMHS Children and Adolescent Mental Health Services, you will know that that long waiting list is because we have so many children who are diagnosed with some kind of mental health difficulty. And that comes from a number of things. Again, a lot of it can be societal. With children who are in poverty, We have children who are hungry, children who have huge levels of anxiety, maybe because of housing instability. Their parents don't know where they're going to be living from one month to the next, or, environmental and social changes, um, you know, um, perhaps family stress, that the parents are arguing, or there's some challenge in the family, that's going on. That adds the anxiety and the stress to the children as well. And what we have to think about is our children as a container. Now, ideally, if we have, here's my cup here, if I have an empty container there, we can put knowledge into it and the children learn. But if we're bringing children along and they have anxiety in there already, and they're worrying about poverty, and they're hungry, and they have stress at home because people are arguing or there's family conflict, then that cup is already full before they even get to school. So their capacity to learn and absorb learning is much less. That's the simplest way I can explain that in terms of children's childhood development. They are overloaded with stuff, if they've got all these things going on. So that's going to affect their capacity to learn as well. So that's an environmental and societal problems that children absorb and bring with them into school and nursery settings as well. So when a child appears that they're unable to learn, we need to kind of consider everything else that's going on around them. As I say, that cup, how much is already in that cup before the child actually gets to school, before they get to their learning environment. Because if that cup is loaded, then their cognitive and emotional capacity to learn is reduced or removed in many cases as well. So, as I say, the pressures that our children experience are not just experienced by children; they are experienced by their families as well. Um, Now, we can look at um, modern family pressures, this vulnerability gap, as I say. We're often told that our children need to spend, or that parents, we're often told that we need to spend more time talking to our children, reading with them, playing with them, and engaging with them. And that's all very well. But we have to look at the modern reality of life. And that is that typically both parents have to work to keep a roof over your head. That's the reality. That's where we are now. When I was younger, when I was a child, my mum was at home all day, every day. My dad went out to work. My mum saw us off to school in the morning. She was there when we came home from school in the afternoon. My dinner was on the table at 5 p.m. And I had time in the evening to read, to play, to talk with my parents. We sat around the table and talked about our day together at school. That was typical in my family. And that was quite normal across the UK. But that's not the way it is now, is it? Because our parents are rushing off to be in work for 8 or 8:30 in the morning. So they're dropping the child off with a childminder or a relative or a nursery, and then the child's taken to school. And then the child's picked up by the person who took them to school, the nursery, the childminder, the relative, or whatever. And the parent comes home, they pick them up, and they take them home. And then the child is at home with the parents, who's probably trying to make the evening meal as well. So that's kind of a rushed meal. It's probably not a nutritious meal either. And they are the parent is trying to find a time where they can sit down and spend that quality time to read, to talk, to play with their child. Because I guess by the time they've made a meal, by the time they've got the child home, they're physically exhausted from their own day at work. And that doesn't happen then. And the child goes to bed. We get up the next morning, it just repeats. So we don't have that quality time with our children anymore. As I say, we don't have that emotional space, that slow observational parenting that perhaps used to happen more often in the past, but society doesn't really lend itself to that now. The next thing we have is this comparison trap, social media. Social media. It's good and it's bad. It's great for spreading news and messages, but it's also bad because lots of parents compare themselves to others, and it's become this competitive sport now. And particularly if your child does have a need, if you're comparing your child to other children all the time, and recognizing that your child isn't the one that's reading early, or isn't achieving academically, or isn't the best in their football or basketball team or whatever, and they're struggling to meet those milestones. That can lead to isolation for you as a parent, but also for your child as well. What do we do about that? We compare ourselves far too much. What we need to learn is that difference is fine and that people will always get there in their own time. Um, we sometimes, as I say, the curriculum pushes children, age-related expectations, yes, but some children will get there later. And because we have to look at the environment around that child, because it's all impacting on how that child can travel towards that milestone. And as I say, the shadow of the pandemic there, it does still affect us today. The anxiety and the stresses, that instability that families saw during the pandemic, although it was 5, 6 years ago now, that we do really have it impacting on how children are dealing with anxiety and how anxious they are when they come to school as well. So as I say, we need to avoid professional judgment around children. If you're working in education, you're an educator or an early years professional, avoid that judgment around families because parents are really trying hard to hold things together. We have to acknowledge that society is not kind. It really isn't. Whether it's social media, whether it's the work-life balance, whatever it is, society is not kind to us all. So we need to be looking at, instead of why hasn't the parent done this, we need to be asking that question, what's preventing the parents from doing this or the family being able to do this, and how can we help them as well? The next section then is about screens. Now, obviously, as I say, we live in this digitally focused environment and our children are exposed to screens all day, every day. And there's nothing inherently bad about screens. Let's be honest, technology has provided extraordinary opportunities for learning and for play and communication, accessibility, and everything. So it's not about screens being bad, it's about what screens have replaced. That's the issue that we've got to look at. Because a child swiping a screen is not getting the same developmental experience as building a tower of bricks or junk modeling with some cardboard boxes and plastic bottles and stuff that they found around the house that they're going to make things with sellotape and glue. It's not the same as climbing a tree or digging in mud or renegotiating the rules of a game. It's a very, very different experience. It's a different developmental process. And what we need to remember here, as I say, the UK government has released landmark screen time guidance here, that 98% of 2-year-olds now engage with screens daily. 98%. Wow. It's iPads, it's watching Barney or whatever it is now. It's probably not Barney now, is it? And Peppa Pig. Even Peppa Pig's probably not the latest now. But whatever it is that they're watching, it is affecting their development. I mean, we have it there. 28% of children struggle to turn the pages in a book because they're used to swiping on a screen now. That's the reality. So what have our screens replaced? Well, it's replaced the things like messy play. Messy play is a hugely important developmental process and opportunity. It's much more than entertainment because it supports language, it supports motor coordination, it supports the problem-solving skills, that imagination development, and also frustration tolerance as you have to negotiate with the people that are with you as well. So messy play is really, really important, like digging in the garden or in the mud, climbing trees and stuff like that. It's really important. The adventurous play, taking chances, managing those risks yourself as a child are really, really important. Asking yourself those questions, can I climb this tree? What will happen if I can't get down? What will happen if I climb? What will happen if I fall? All of those questions are really, really important for children's development. And we can see that 1/3 of children now, University of Exeter study there, don't play outdoors at all after school. I told you at the beginning about what my childhood was like. And our kids aren't getting that now because they've replaced everything with a screen. We need to make sure our children have the opportunity to play outside. Movement is hugely critical to neural pathway development. Neural pathways connect the different parts of the brain together. It's like the wiring. It happens rapidly from the age of 0 right up to about 6 or 7 years old. And we need to make really, really movement-rich environments. It's why I have a huge conflict in me about our national curriculum and what we do at 6 years old, expecting children to move into a more formalized classroom environment, because that is an opportunity to really make sure that we give the movement to children and those neural pathways are developing as they need to, because we can negate an awful lot of the effects of special educational needs if we have that movement-rich environment embedded in our curriculum right up to the ages of 6, 7, 8 years old. Hugely, hugely important. And movement is incredibly important for those kids who have ADHD and dyspraxia. They need that vestibular and proprioceptive input to help them regulate, particularly in classrooms when they get to formalized classrooms. They can't sit for those prolonged periods. They need movement within their day. So we have to ask them to carry stuff or move stuff or take errands and stuff like that. We have to build that into our days for those children as well. So we want children to regulate their behavior in classrooms and be receptive learners. We've got to ask ourselves at the same time, are we providing the activities that allow them to regulate their behavior? Because if we're not, we're going to see misbehavior. We're going to see conflict between teaching staff and students, teaching staff and parents, parents and students. That conflict's going to come because the kid isn't behaving. It's not that they're not behaving, they're not having the opportunity for the sensory input that their bodies require. And that's, as I say, part of development. So we need to ask, some behaviors, are they really challenging, or is it children who are attempting to meet an unmet need that we haven't provided an opportunity for in this formalized environment of the classroom? So why does childhood look different today? There are so many more children with SEND. There aren't more children with SEND. We have better diagnosis, better understanding of what special educational needs and disabilities are. We don't just simply put a naughty or misbehaving label on children anymore, as we did when I was back at school. And those days, thankfully, are well behind us. What we do have is this environmental mismatch, as I say. We have an average school day. If you think about it, the modern classroom is full of fluorescent light tubes. There's always noise going on outside the room, up the corridor, the next classroom, in this classroom. People are fidgeting with things. You know, if you've got SEND, if you've got special educational needs and disabilities in that kind of classroom, you will find some of the content, some even online content as well, quite challenging to process. Some of the online content can be worrying or nasty as well. If you're left to kind of to explore your devices alone. So we need to be very, very mindful about what our children are accessing online, because their sensitive nervous systems are overloaded very, very easily. So be very, very mindful about what your children are looking at. Put the controls on their devices so that they can't access things that they shouldn't. We are going to have a move towards these digital support plans for learners, and that's going to come on in the next 3 years now. That one-size-fits-all approach is going to disappear. You won't have to wait for a diagnosis to get support now. There's going to be a universal offer for support in every school, what we call universal design for learning. So that a lot of the expectations that we've spoken about already, those movement breaks and things like that, will be built into normal classroom delivery, or should be, so that it's there for all students, not just those with special educational needs and disabilities. It doesn't mean that they stick out because they need a movement break. We're going to get everyone to make a movement break. It might just be, right, everyone stand up, turn around, sit back down, stretch your arms above your head, back to the table, fold your arms, look this way. Things like that. That movement is crucial, and it's very simple. Might sound very pedantic and militarized, maybe, that we're doing those things for kids, but the kids who need that vestibular and proprioceptive input will need that. The universal design for learning says, let's just do it for everyone, and then nobody looks different. As I say, everyone's getting what they need. So as I say, for many children with additional needs, the classroom is a really challenging environment, huge sensory input. As I say, whether it's from the screen that the teacher's teaching from, whether it's the fluorescent lights, the noise in the classroom, or whatever. And what we need to be very mindful of is that reducing play reduces the brain's natural laboratory for self-regulation. We need to be very mindful that we don't create classrooms that are too formalized too early. Yes, there's a place for them, maybe in secondary school. Primary schools, I'm a primary trained teacher, you might know. Primary schools are places for play, and play is hugely, hugely important in development. That movement is hugely, hugely important. And if I've got a challenge that comes from this book, from this handbook, or from these webinars, these videos that we're doing, it's to get educational leaders to think about how they can make sure that play and movement is an integral part of the daily um, learning experience for children from the ages, particularly from 3, 4 years old, right through to the ages of 8, maybe even 9 as well. Maybe I'm going to extend it and chance my arm a little bit here, because children need it. They don't need to sit in a seat for 2 or 3 hours at a time, waiting, having very quick transitions, not having the opportunity to stand up, move around. As I say, those simple things. So yeah, we need to make sure that children have that when they're better self-regulated. We're removing some of that anxiety, we're lifting some of that trauma and that cognitive load out of the cup, and there's a greater capacity then for learning to go in. Yeah, that's the way it works. That's how children are. We're not managing the children anymore. What we're doing is we're starting to understand them and their needs. So, our environment then. Not every child has a problem in every environment. We need to remember that the environment may be causing the child problems. We need to be mindful about what we can do to help the child navigate that environment so that they are ready for learning. And that's where we're going to end our first video. I'll see you in the next one when we'll be talking about how that developmental growth happens and what we can do to support it in our children. Thanks for your time today.